Welcome again to a short video courtesy of investingsuccess.ca. Today is July the 1st, 2024. One of my favorite financial institutions is the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank. And it's my favorite because these guys do a lot of very deep, meaningful studies of economic data. One of the studies that they do is called the Financial Stress Index, and here's a picture of it on this particular slide. And according to their website, they use interest rates, short-term, medium-term, long-term. They use various interest rate spreads and other data points, which they do not disclose, but they somehow have a black box algorithm, and data in produces the plot that you see here before you. Notice on the plot, there's a zero line, and the bottom axis is time. So this particular shot goes from, the time around 1995 right up to about the current time. Now, notice that on this plot, there's a zero line. So when the index is above the zero line, as far as the economists at the St. Louis Fed are concerned, there is stress in the financial system. When the index is below the zero line, there is little in the way of stress. There is a correlation between the stress index and the equity markets. And so let me draw your attention to the midpoint of the chart above. On the bottom axis, locate the time around 2005. What you see there is the stress index is below the zero mark, indicating that there is not a lot of stress in the system. Well, think back to what was happening in 2005. The markets are doing good. Anybody who could, exhale and fog up a bathroom mirror magically was eligible for a mortgage all of a sudden, and these mortgages were getting sliced and diced into tranches and being sold off to insurance companies and hedge funds. What could possibly go wrong? Well, we know that it all culminated in the biggest financial crisis that perhaps ever occurred in the United States of America. And take a look at what happened then to the stress index. It spiked, and it went from below the zero line all the way up to almost hitting a value of 10. Government intervention came along, things like the TARP program, massive amounts of money injected into the system, and the stress eventually came back under control, and it got down to the zero line, and it kind of bumped along on either side of the zero line up until, a respiratory disease called COVID. And it took the world by surprise. It caused a lot of stress. Supply chains were disrupted. The equity markets went into a tailspin spasm for a while. And you can see that the stress index went from below the zero line to just a touch over 5. And then thanks to government intervention and money being pumped into the system, the stress index went back down below 0. And really, that is where we are today. Now, yes, I know that interest rates have gone up and somewhat normalized, but that somehow has not really caused a lot of stress. If you listen to the monthly job numbers that come out of the Bureau of Labor, there's jobs being created out there. People are working. Money is being made, and everything is generally humming along reasonably well. And you can see that in the equity markets. The Dow, the S&P, the NASDAQ are pressing higher. Sure, they're driven by a handful of tech stocks, but it's not like all of the other stocks that make up those indices are falling apart either. The economy is generally doing reasonably well. Now, a chart for something like the financial stress index is a time series of data. And in previous YouTube videos, I've talked about time series of data. And in a time series, every data point occurs at a successive measured time interval. And way back in 1898, there was a British mathematician, Sir Arthur Schuster. He wrote a very famous scientific paper, and he was looking at sunspots. And he plotted on a graph the occurrence of sunspots, and he created a time series of data. And then he said, okay, I wonder if there is any kind of a cyclical, periodic pattern to these sunspots as they occur. And so what he did to really determine whether or not there was a pattern is he used a technique called a Fourier transform. Now today we have computer programs that do all of this. Back in his day it was pencil and paper and the old school method. So to give you an example, there's a musical chord. It's called the chord of C major. And if a person hits the notes on a piano keyboard to generate C, E, and G all at the same time, the sound that you hear is called the chord of C major. It's a pleasant sound, very pleasing to the ear. Now let's just say you heard the chord of C major, but you didn't really know what it was made up of. But let's suppose that you had at your fingertips a mathematical function called the Fourier transform. And let's suppose you were able to break the chord of C major into its individual parts. Your analysis would show that the chord of C major, that pleasant sound that you're hearing, is actually made up of individual parts comprising the notes of C, E, and G. And so Schuster ended up calling this analytical approach the periodogram. And today, as I say, there are software programs out there that can take data and analyze it for the dominant cycles that comprise the time series. Now, I have looked at the financial stress index, and I've looked at it through the lens of the S&P 500, because there is a correlation during times when the stress index gets above zero. There is a notable weakness on the equity markets. And so on a weekly chart of the S&P 500, I've been able to determine that the financial stress follows a pattern, a cyclical pattern of 186 weeks. And then there's a smaller pattern embedded in there of 66 weeks. And I can actually look at my chart of the S&P 500 with all of this cyclical work overlaid. And I can take it all the way back to the tech bubble that was peaking in the year 2000. So here it is. Here's the weekly chart of the S&P 500. The blue arcs on the chart are the 186 bar cycles. The red arcs that you see on the chart are the 66 bar cycles. And I draw your attention then to the early point of 2023. The markets, they sold off in 2022 and bottomed late in 2022. And what we're showing here is that the 66 bar cycle actually ended and a new one started early in 23. And I'm showing that right around the same time, the 186 bar cycle reached its crest. And I should also point out that these things are never pinpoint accurate. You have to allow for a little bit of leeway, a little give and take, as it were, because the markets don't turn on a dime. They sometimes take a bit of time. But looking forward then, you can see that earlier in 2024, the S&P had what amounted to a little over a 2% sell-off. And and that aligns to the end then of one of these 66-bar cycles. Now, where are we headed from here? Well, in late 2024, like in 6 months from now, we're going to be having a peak, a crest of one of these 66-bar cycles. Shortly after that, as we get into like February, early March of 2025, give or take, we're going to be at the end of one of these 186-bar cycles. And so I think potentially what is coming at us then is a market peak late in 24, early 25. And that then is going to lead to the financial stress index starting to get above that zero line and financial stress starting to grow. I mean, all you have to do is listen to some of the economists and the analysts that Bloomberg brings on. I know they are all saying we're headed to some kind of a soft landing. There's going to be some kind of a recession. These job numbers that we're seeing cannot continue like this. And yeah, they're right, obviously. So the question then is, when does the market complex reach a peak? Well, the stress index is indicating, as I say, end of 24, early 25, which is not that far away. Now, in terms of astrology, we have to just look at the work of Louise McWhirter from 1937. So she analyzed a fair chunk of data, and she determined that there is this 18.6-year, give or take, cycle in the general economy, and she was able to determine that that is in alignment with the north node of the moon moving through the 12 signs of the zodiac. And she said once that north node of the moon gets into the sign of Pisces and then starts heading towards the sign of Aquarius, you are staring a financial crisis right between the eyeballs. So where are we today? Well, right at the moment we have Jupiter in the sign of Gemini. Now, if you read McWhirter's book, she says that is generally a good thing. And is it? Sure. Interest rates have normalized, but we're still creating jobs. The market is moving up. Companies are making money, perhaps not as much as they otherwise would like to, but the economy is generally holding together. So if the markets are going to peak in late 24, early 25, is there anything in the astrology that would align with that? Yeah, there is. In early 2025, Saturn is going to be very, very close to being 0 degrees conjunct to the North Node. And if you read McWhirter's 1937 analysis, anytime you have Saturn conjunct the node or at any other hard aspect to it, that acts as a brake on the economy. And that's why I think Saturn is going to be the brake on the economy, the tapping of the brakes, if you will, that starts financial stress on its upward trajectory. What else is happening at the end of 24, early 25? Well, sure, you're going to have a new president being inaugurated into the White House. Who knows? It might be the same guy that's sitting in the chair right now, getting tapped on the shoulder to do another 4 years. Then again, it might be a guy that used to have the job up until a few years ago, being asked to sit in the chair again. In my opinion, it doesn't really matter. I believe that the markets move in these cycles. Financial stress moves in cycles. And I don't think the person sitting in the chair in the Oval Office is going to influence the cycles one way or another. You know, things like money supply, some of the policies at the Federal Reserve, some of the foreign policy. I mean, all of these things really don't revolve around one man. These things have been many years in the making, and that's why the economy moves in these 18.6-year cycles. So yes, financial stress, I think, at the end of this year is going to start on an upward trajectory. It's all part of us heading towards the end of a McWhirter 18.6 year cycle. And you know what? Take a look around at what's happening in the world. There's conflict, Israel and Hamas, and now that's in danger of spreading over into Lebanon. Um, you've got this thing in the Ukraine which just will not stop. And it's like Putin just keeps agitating. And now you've got a shift to more right-wing politics in Europe. Just take a look at the elections in France. The world is very unsettled. And take a look at the amount of debt that is accumulated in places like Canada, the United States. Take a look at what's happening in China with some of the geopolitics concerning Taiwan. Take a look at what's happening in China concerning their aging population. And I could sit here all afternoon talking about the red flags and the warning signs. But we are headed to a financial crisis. The writing is on the wall. We know it's coming. And is it going to be comparable to 2008? I think it actually could be worse. But that's just my opinion. But it is coming. So get ready for it. And just bear in mind that the financial stress index moves in cycles. And the cycles are saying beware of late 2024, early 2025. You're going to start to see financial stress start to tick up. And it will continue then to tick up until we hit the full-blown crisis and the end of the 18.6 year cycle, which, by the way, is going to be 2026, 2027. And in fact, yes, late 2026 will see the end of one of these 66 bar cycles. And late 2026 will see a peak, a crest, in the 186 bar cycle. And so that's why I think everything that's happening is generally in alignment with this 18.6 year cycle. And when it starts to end and when these financial stress cycles end or reach their peak, their crest, I think the wheels are going to fall off the wagon. And so the question you have to ask yourself then is, are you ready for it? What are you going to do about it? Anybody who tried to remain fully invested in 2008 endured an awful lot of pain. Maybe what a person needs to do is lighten the load a little bit, knowing that we're going into one of these financial crises. And there's no harm in sitting on cash for 5 or 6 months. You're not going to make a lot, but you're not going to lose a lot either. You're going to keep your powder dry. But I'll leave it up to you to decide how you are going to navigate the coming crisis, but it is coming. All right. That's it for me. You know where to find me, investingsuccess.ca. I've got my letters, my reports. You'll find me on Substack. It's probably about time I put out another course or two on Udemy. And whatever you do, whatever you are involved in, just remember to always follow the trend. And what you're going to find is when the trend on a short-term basis changes on a stock or on a commodity, you can be pretty well assured that somewhere behind that change of trend, there is a planetary event going on. It could be a retrograde. It could be Sun or Mars passing a key point of the first trade chart. But astrology and the trend, they go hand in hand. And you really have to be following both of them to have a pretty good grip on the markets. And now I've introduced you to this financial stress index and showing you its cycles. So every time I post one of these, my goal is to educate you, offer you some sage advice, give you some new tools to work with. And hopefully these tools will make you a better trader, make you a better investor, and keep you out of trouble when trouble comes a-knocking on the door. Alrighty. Thank you kindly, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and we will talk real soon.